There actually aren't all that many courses on corruption control that are organised around professional responsibilities. There's a lot of courses on corruption and analysing the causes and effects of corruption for academics, or for people who study corruption, or for special interest groups, Transparency International and others. And this course is actually focused on people who work in the public sector. It's not solely focused on corruption. It's any other risks to integrity as well. So we do talk about conflicts of interest, reasons why integrity in public service delivery might be compromised. There's obviously a lot of reason to pay close attention to corruption control in developing countries, because everyone who works in development says corruption is the principal impediment to growth and prosperity in many, many countries around the globe. We won't focus in this course specifically on developing countries, and most of the students are not from developing countries. If they are, that's fine, but it's not a careful focus on the dynamics of development. The traditional literature looks at very high-level causes. It's populated mostly by macroeconomists who look at what determines the level of corruption almost at the level of nations. They're trying to connect a rather general category of behaviors called corruption with huge levers, economic development and prosperity and emerging democracy, that you might or might not be able to move. And that's the nature of much of the literature, and we absolutely will not do that during this course. Our starting presumption is there's not one corruption problem in a country. There's probably 30 different types. They have very different characteristics. You need to unbundle them first. And that once you've unbundled them and focus on very specific corruption problems, then you're going to discover quite different causes and sets of factors that count. Your intervention strategies will be tailor-made and unique, and the solution for one corruption problem that's mostly about poorly drawn-up guidance is entirely different from your solution to another corruption problem, which is about embedded organized crime. So we are taking the problem-solving method and explicitly applying it to problems of corruption. The book is not especially about corruption. The book is about the business of controlling bad things, controlling risks, controlling harms, controlling problems to society and for the human race. So corruption shows up in the book as an example from time to time and in special places, because the corruption problem has unique characteristics that make it particularly awkward to control. But the book itself is actually about the operational risk management method, and applies equally across a very broad range of harms. The knot analogy is actually very useful, because the patterns of thought and action that go with careful risk identification and control are strangely similar to the patterns of thought and action that go with untying a knot. If you give a knot like that to an adult and say, please undo it, and watch the way they behave, they look at it quite carefully and they assume that the thing is unique. Maybe they won't pull and tug immediately. They'll look at the different perspective from the back or from the side until they really understand the structure. And once you've understood the structure of a knot, you're actually beginning to develop a plan for unraveling it. And that's precisely what we're looking for with the careful identification of corruption problems and the ability to unravel them one by one. No, you don't have to be a corruption control specialist, but you can be. We're actually not providing specialist training. You can imagine specialist courses for auditors, specialist courses for investigators. specialist courses for investigative journalists. All of these people have an important role in corruption control, but we're not training them in their discipline. The idea is that we will put together in the classroom all the three classes of actors that have an important role to play in corruption control. And they are first, and probably the majority, line managers in public agencies, whose job is not corruption control, it's something else, but they have responsibilities. They should know what their responsibilities are and where they end, and where they hand off to somebody else. Then there's internal specialists with an investigative role, or an oversight role, or an audit role, maybe risk officers, or compliance officers, or ethics officers. They work for the agency, but their job is more specialist. And then there's all the external specialists, including law enforcement, the prosecutors, investigative journalism, civil society. They are welcome too, and we really want these different parties to understand the role of the others and the value of the others' techniques, and to know what kind of relationship they should have. We do go beyond criminal conduct, as do most organizations that take care of corruption and integrity issues. Conflicts of interest is less serious, often grayer, harder to define, but there's actually other behaviors which are not necessarily conflict of interest nor criminal, but are nevertheless risky. They jeopardize the agency. And one of the trends that we see quite clearly is a lot of people acting not out of selfish interest or greed, but trying to help their agency perform better or look better. And so they take shortcuts, and so they take risks. So they put aside certain cautions or procedural guidelines for the sake of rapid meeting of an objective. These we call performance-enhancing risks. And a lot of what gets public agencies into trouble is people actually trying to help the agency. This is a bit of a surprise. We always assumed it was personal greed and criminal conduct. That's a much clearer cut case. There are such risks in all three sectors. This course is aimed for the public sector principally. We would not mind having a smattering of people from the other sectors as leavening, but I do think it should retain its principal focus on the public sector, because the public sector is the most complicated. The obligations on public managers are many more and often conflicting, and the nature of ethical challenges in the public sector is very much about balancing competing obligations, all of which are perfectly valid, and where the trades require an enormous amount of judgment and maturity.